Hey guys, this is Pablo. Welcome to another Meditation Amsterdam video. In today's video, I want to make a summary of why mindfulness works. This is my current understanding, and it is a kind of consolidation of quite a bit of research and practice and experimentation that I've been doing in the past few years. It is by no means definitive, but it feels relatively solid. So I want to get started, and I'll use, as usual, my whiteboard and my markers. Before I continue with this video, if you are already subscribed to the channel and you think the content is cool, press the like button. And if you are not yet subscribed and you think this is valuable content, do subscribe. I continue to make more videos to share this kind of knowledge around. So let's get started. So the situation that we have at hand when we begin working with ourselves is that we have here our head, right? So this is the individual over here, okay? And as you can see, he's not too happy. And the reason he's not too happy is because he's got a head full of all kinds of thoughts and problems and situations to resolve, desires to fulfill, things to acquire, right? So if we take a zoom in picture of this thing over here, it's a big blob of memories, opinions, hang-ups, traumas, right? Unresolved situations that prevent a big, shining, loving smile from being there all the time. And so the challenge that we have is, so how do we resolve these? Now this individual goes around, so he's got, of course, a body, and he's got a pair of legs, and he's got arms as well, and he has a voice, right? So he goes around going places, doing things and saying things that will make this stuff better. Now, that typically doesn't make this stuff better. It just it either suppresses it or represses it, or it postpones its resolution, or it dampens the discomfort, right? I just made a video yesterday about buffers and how, according to G.I. Gurdjieff, we surround ourselves with buffers. We buffer ourselves from life all the time because direct experience of life creates discomfort all the time. So this individual goes around taking action. It's also thinking, right? So he has mental action, verbal action, he does things, he goes places trying to dampen the discomfort that is arising all the time. And now, when we begin to realize that all this doing only postpones and dampens the discomfort, that we want to find a fundamental solution to the discomfort, we come across then the teachings of the perennial philosophies like Buddhism, Taoism, Sufism, Hermetics in the case of the West, for example, or things that are a little bit more obscure, like the Rosicrucians or the whoever's, the Golden Dawn Society, whatever. Right, so we come across the perennial philosophies, and these perennial philosophies come with a set of tenets and practices that we can put in place to start to make these things a little bit better, right? To make our lives better, fundamentally better. And then we start to practice these things, but there is a problem, which is that our basic mental setup is still the same. So we engage in these practices pretty much in the same way that we engage on everything else. We sing mantras, we participate in ceremonies, and we sometimes also take psychedelics, or do all these kind of practices and activities to make this better. And over time, there are some improvements, but the fundamentals still don't change. And that's because we don't trust in pure mindfulness, in pure and undistilled mindfulness. And so we face a real challenge here, because you see, all the things that we think, say, and do, even if they are spiritual in nature, are still being informed by the very mind that is confused and full of kinks and full of wrong ideas about how things work. So we face a real challenge, which is that we can't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Yeah. No matter what we do, it's still informed by the same mind that got us into the problem in the first place. Now, I read a very compelling metaphor this weekend, which said that you can't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, but you can make yourself more buoyant. You can make your quality more buoyant. So you can't pull yourself up, but if you make yourself more buoyant, you float up, right? And that's the right understanding of things. And so I thought I'd make this video to drive a single point home, which I think makes all the difference in the kind of practice that we do for self-realization and self-cultivation, which has less to do with thought, less to do with saying things, less to do with doing things or going places, even if those places are a retreat or visiting a guru or some kind of going to India or whatever. And the practice is the pure and undiluted practice of mindfulness, mindful observation. So I want to explain why it works and why we can have confidence in the practice that seems to not be logical, but is in fact very logical. Now, if we notice the situation that we have in which we can't really do anything to address this problem here, because everything that we do and say is coming from the problem itself, then we notice that we need to take a separate approach. The approach of mindfulness is one approach in which we simply, with our mind's eye, begin to observe these things. And I'm going to use a different color for that. We simply begin to observe these thoughts and discomforts and things, but we also turn our mind's eye to the source of those things, which is inside the body. In other words, for each of these thoughts and thoughts of discomfort and unhappiness and restlessness that arise, there is an equal and parallel source of discomfort inside the body itself, typically around the throat, the heart, the belly, or the hips, right? So our central channel. And so we begin to observe these relentlessly, and we observe and observe and observe and observe. Now, the mind will object against this, and the objection of the mind is: listen, how is it that you're asking me not to say or do anything about the problem, or to go somewhere and take action? How is it that just observing is going to solve any of this? That doesn't make any sense. And to the thinking mind, which, as we saw in the previous little diagram, is the very source of the problem, of course it doesn't make any sense. But I will explain it now from a different perspective, which I hope conveys why mindful observation is the thing that dissolves the problem. Okay? So what's happening is the following. Once again, you have the individual here, mind, and body. And part of the problem that we have is that a lot of what's happening in here is happening unnoticed. So this is a question mark, and we have things happening here in the body with a lot of question marks because they are happening below the threshold of our perception. In other words, we don't even know they're happening. We just see their effects, which we call unhappiness, right? Or whatever. I'm going to make all of this black because I see that my blue marker is starting to fail. So much of what is happening in our system, we don't even know it's happening. So at first it's happening and we don't perceive it. Now, what we begin to do is we begin to use our mind's eye to have the mind observe its own processes, and we also use our mind's eye to observe the sensations in the body. As we do that, two things begin to happen. One of them is what used to be unknown things start to become known. So I'm going to use green to start to depict areas where suddenly you begin to know that there are such things as bodily discomforts, which trigger mental processes of thinking and ruminating and things of that kind. So the first is you've identified now that there's a there, okay? It's like, oh, I had no clue that there were all these sensations there, but now I cannot not see them anymore. Once I've seen them, there they are, all right? So that's the first thing that observation does. Observation creates a first level, which is, so you go from not knowing, not known. So this is your starting point. From there you go to known. Yeah. And as you continue to observe, known becomes integrated or befriended. Integrate or befriend. And this happens because the very act of one part of the mind observing another part of the mind. Yeah. So let's make this. First of all, it's an unknown part of the mind, right? So this observing this creates, so just touching something with your attention, just touching it with your attention creates a neural handshake. Yeah? One that did not exist before. See, the reason this is unknown is because this here doesn't exist. But the moment observation is applied to the question mark, now there's a neural connection where there was none before, where it had been either severed through trauma or it just didn't exist. So this whole process here was running unattended to, unknown. But because we place our attention there, we touch it with our attention, we therefore create a neural handshake with it. And as time goes by, that neural handshake starts to become stronger and stronger and stronger. Yeah, so more observation, more observation, more observation. What ends up eventually happening is this entire unknown area now becomes not only known, yeah, but it also becomes so familiar that it is realized as none other than part of our very own self, and therefore integrated as, hey, this is just me doing its thing. Now, if you think about this very process with all of these elements here, right, what ends up happening is you have at the start a bunch of unknown areas that are floating around, not known, but through observation of them, they all become connected and therefore they become harmonized. It's almost like you had a bunch of neighbors that didn't know one another, and then they start to do little barbecues together, right? You know, they say hi through the window first, and then it's like, hey, let's get together for dinner. And then it's like, oh, you know, would you like to come to my bar mitzvah, or, be the, the guy who does whatever, right? So now there's this bi-directional communication between all of them. So what could have been a bit of a contentious situation now becomes a harmonious situation because there's communication happening back and forth. And that happens without the need of thought, without trying to think or manipulate or use your logic, which is all thought, or go to a place or take a certain action, an external action. It all happens purely through your power of placing your attention somewhere. And that placing of your attention creates that neural handshake between things that were disconnected, and therefore dysregulated. So that's the primary gist of this video. It is trying to explain why simple mindful observation creates neural handshakes inside our system, which therefore allow us to resolve internal areas that were out of whack, and therefore make problems into situations, because the problematic part of a problem is the fact that something in our system is in friction with another part of the system, and it is in friction because it is not communicating correctly. That is my plight towards mindfulness. It's a logical, scientifically based explanation of why mindfulness works and why it is in fact the only thing that works. That logic will hijack this process and completely interrupt it, because now you're introducing thinking, which is trying to pull yourselves up by your own bootstraps. It can never work. This is becoming more buoyant, so you float upwards as opposed to trying to yank yourself upwards through force. I hope the explanation makes sense. I hope it invites you to meditate and to make use of this as the primary tool for self-realization and self-cultivation. Once again, if you haven't liked my content, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back with more. Cheers.